Welcome to Go a Little Mad, a horror movie podcast. I'm Jason, and I love scary movies.
I'm Briana, and I don't. Today we are discussing The Exorcist. So let's get into some credits for The Exorcist. We have the screenplay was written by William Peter Blatty, who actually also wrote the book, so it's adapted from his book. It is directed by William Friedkin, and it stars Linda Blair as Regan McNeil, Ellen Burstyn as Chris McNeil, or as Mom, as I'm going to call her throughout as we talk about it, Jason Miller as Father Damien Karras, and Max von Sydow as Father Lancaster Mirren.
I know it's not quite Flesh Wounds time, but a little fun fact is that William Peter Blatty, when writing it, envisioned Father Karras as Jack Nicholson, but William Friedkin vetoed Jack Nicholson as he said he was too unholy to play a priest.
That's a little preview then to our Flesh Wounds. So the synopsis for this is, first of all, this is a cautionary tale about the dangers of using a Ouija board. That's first and foremost.
Yeah, absolutely. We went to Salem last week, and when we were in one of the various shops that they have in Salem, I was instructed by both Briana and her family that I'm not even allowed to touch a Ouija board in the shop. So I'm guessing there's, some family history here.
Well, no, not officially, but we also don't want there to be.
Fair enough.
Witchcraft is fun, but we don't fuck with Ouija boards. Officially, this is about a young girl who becomes possessed by the devil and can only be saved by the power of Christ. In short, it's Catholic propaganda.
Sounds compelling.
What are your flesh wounds for the film?
First of all, we've got a Rotten Tomato score of 83%, which was a little lower than I would have guessed, to be totally honest. As I was reading up on it, turns out very similar to Psycho. It had some kind of mixed reviews at the start, and I think that's kind of, again, this was a new thing. It certainly wasn't the first horror movie, but it was a first for lots of things, and I think it just, people didn't know what to do with it. Critics didn't know how to respond to it. They didn't know how to deal with some of the vulgarity that was in there. So 83%, pretty good, but I would have put my life on over 90. But yeah, so I've got a couple cool flesh wounds here, some fun facts. So everybody knows about the vomit being split pea soup.
Ew.
Yeah. But it was supposed to hit Father Karras in the chest, not the face. So you see the scene in the movie, it hits him in the face, there's a very quick cut, and then when it cuts back to him again very quickly, he's kind of wiping the last of the vomit off his face. And my initial thought when seeing that scene is, wow, he wiped that off very fast. Seemed like a continuity error. But what actually happened was it was supposed to hit him in the chest. It hit him in the face on accident. So that look of disgust on his face is absolutely genuine. And they decided to use that take. My guess is the quick cut is just because he immediately yelled cut or some obscenity or something they couldn't use in the film.
I missed all of that because as soon as she started vomiting, I just stopped looking. So didn't see any of that fun stuff.
Well, we can't do a podcast if you don't actually watch the movie, Briana.
I'm not going to watch the gross stuff. I think that's well established.
All right. Also, adjusted for inflation, it is the highest grossing R-rated film of all time and the highest grossing Warner Brothers film of all time.
Whoa.
Yeah. I don't have the exact number here, but it made a lot of money. It had a lot of word of mouth due to, just the
shock factor.
Yeah, exactly. The hysteria around it. There were reports of heart attacks and, trigger warning, miscarriages.
None of those things would make me go to the theater. People had heart attacks. Bye. I'm not going.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a mindset where it's well, those people were wimps. I can handle it. And you go almost prove to everyone and yourself that you are not a wimp who can die of a heart attack from a movie.
I don't need to prove that.
Well, yeah, that's how you made it how many years without watching scary movies?
35.
Yeah, exactly.
Successful years.
So the last thing that I've got here is throughout the movie, anyone who's seen it is going to know that demon face that continues pulsing in and out during various parts of the movie. During Father Karras' dream sequence, a couple times with Regan in the bed. There are a couple places where that face kind of appears. And spoiler alert for when we discuss the movie, Briana screamed at all of them.
I didn't like that.
Yeah. So the initial teaser trailer for the movie was actually just that face fading in and out of black.
Ew.
And then it would say The Exorcist. And well, so your reaction is correct because it actually wasn't shown in most theaters because it was deemed too frightening.
Okay. That's funny now. It is frightening, but it's not that frightening. I guess, but I am sensitive and it was scary. So, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, you
scary.
did scream like 5 times, even though you'd seen it all 5 times.
Scream? I made noise.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's all I've got for Flesh Wounds. Before we really get into the recap, the rundown of what happened in the story, I just want to throw out a little something that happened before the movie started. We were about to hit play. We were discussing it a little bit, and Briana was laughing about something. I don't remember what. I made a joke. I'm hilarious. And immediately just like stopped mid-laugh and went, oh, God, we're about to watch The Exorcist. Oh, God. And was pretty freaked out about it. You'll have to stick around and find out if she still felt that way after. But it was a high point of the evening for me.
You can count on me for that. Just instant regret before it even happens. All right. So what is your experience with the film? What was it like when you first saw it? When did you first see it?
Funny enough, I actually don't remember the first time I saw this movie.
Is it because you passed out like others who have seen it?
No. It's just because I've actually seen this movie a million times. I did see it in the theater. It had like an anniversary re-release with an uncut version, and that's the one we watched. And I did see that in the theater. I don't quite remember how old I was, but I've just seen this movie so many times. It's just sort of like this, like, it's always there. It's always been there. So I couldn't even tell you the first time I watched it. It's one of my favorites. It's a classic, and I love it.
Does it still scare you?
I wouldn't say it scares me, but there are definitely some shots that make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That face is still unsettling.
Yeah. Well, of course, I've heard of the film. I've heard of the vomiting. I've heard of the neck turn.
The head turn. Yeah, that's a really good one.
And I've seen her face in many a compilation. So her demon face wasn't shocking for me in any way because I'm very much accustomed to it. And I think my dad has seen parts of it, of course, fully accidentally, because fear of horror runs in the family. It is genetic.
So your dad does not like scary movies?
Hates. Would never attempt to do what we're doing here. Ever. Doesn't want to. Has no regrets about it either.
All right.
And I feel like maybe this movie created the possession trope.
I was told we weren't allowed to say trope anymore, but yeah, I mean, as far as I know, it was the first, kind of mainstream possession movie. I certainly can't think of any earlier examples.
Well, and since then, it's been done time and again, most memorably for me with Days of Our Lives. Days of Our Lives did this, I don't know, I think I was 9, and I don't know why I was watching this. Like, I know why I was watching Days of Our Lives. It was because my grandmother watched Days of Our Lives. But why she allowed me to watch a possession storyline, I'll never know. But Stefano, somehow, he's evil. Stefano, we know Stefano, gets Marlena to become possessed by the devil until she's saved by a priest who is John Black, formerly and probably now currently, because both of these people are still on the show, her lover. So he's a priest, but formerly and currently her lover.
Okay, he's one of those priests. So when was this? How old were you?
Like 9, I think.
I had no idea that Days of Our Lives had supernatural elements. I'm going to be honest. I know there was that soap opera that was like Passions. That was ridiculous and over the top, but yes. I did not know Days of Our Lives went down that road. I might have watched it.
Well, they sprinkled it in. It definitely wasn't commonplace. This was maybe the first time they did it. And guess what?
Was it scary at all?
Oh my God, it haunts me. Yes, it was scary because, again, I was 9. So the imagery, and I don't actually know if this is true imagery or if I'm making it up, but I think eventually it progresses to Marlena fully physically transforming into like the devil or a demon.
So you don't remember if it was just a demon or the devil?
Well, I think they kept calling it the devil, but the imagery in my brain is not of like what the devil typically looks like. So I don't know. Again, I don't even know if I'm making this up. I might be making this up. The possession storyline is true.
We're going to have to do a whole episode on Days of Our Lives. Honestly, I want to watch this now.
Well, guess what? They're bringing it back with the same people.
What?
Marlena is once again being possessed by the devil.
Currently, like right now?
In 2021.
Wow, that is...
I don't know when they started it, but I read an article recently about it that they're doing that. So,
all right, well, keep an eye on our Twitter tomorrow. I'm going to be watching Days of Our Lives and I'll live tweet it. That's a joke. Don't expect that.
We should watch it though. But yeah, so that's kind of my experience, not directly with this film, but the idea of possession.
All right. I hope The Exorcist lives up to the terror of Days of Our Lives.
All right, should we get into the film?
Yeah, take it away.
The first shot, And immediately, this is ridiculous, but the first shot is a side of a house. And my first thought, and I said this out loud, was that this is Kevin McAllister's house. And that is simply because it is a brick house.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it because it doesn't actually look like his house as the camera pans out.
Not even in the slightest. I actually was writing as you said that. Briana says it looks like the Home Alone house, but it doesn't. So definitely not.
The camera takes us through a quick shot through a town, a look of a church. Then we get super short credits. Like we don't even get the full typical credits that you would get today of like director, producer, actors, nothing. Music starts playing, which is just a guitar screeching, and I hate it.
Yeah, you actually said the words, I hate it.
Yeah.
The music was really unsettling. I thought it was well done. You know, I think that that's something this movie has going for it even, 50 years later is just the sound effects, the music.
The
really
music
does a good
is really
job.
good.
Yeah.
It does a very minimal amount of music, but the pieces that it includes are effective.
Yeah, it sets the tone really well.
Then we transition to the Middle East, and the music changes accordingly. They're specifically in northern Iraq on like an archaeological site. Now, I'm already thrown because I'm like, what? What's going on? Where are we? Why are we here?
Yeah, it was funny. This is a little side note here, kind of. It's not really relevant to the movie, but it's really strange sometimes to think of Iraq as this place of ancient culture, because I think most of our lives it's been this like political issue. So when you think of, ancient cultures, when you think of Mesopotamia, when you think of the cradle of civilization, you don't necessarily think of Iraq, but that's where it is.
The camera pans around kind of showing the digging site, which is massive. And I think it's a kid or like a preteen.
Yeah, it's a kid.
He's running through it, and he keeps running until he reaches someone who we later learn is Father Merrin to tell him that they found something. And at this point, I'm getting strong Buffy vibes. I feel like this is the beginning of the episode where someone somewhere digs up some historical thing that's going to be very evil and bring evil down upon essentially Sunnydale.
Yeah, this is more, when we talked about Psycho, we talked about how normal that opening scene was. This is more classic horror scene, some kind of unclear, ominous event that foreshadows the events that are about to unfold, but we don't really get it yet.
Right. So Father Merrin goes and inspects the bits that have been found. They found one piece that looks like a small coin, but there's a tiny hole in it that could fit, like a chain. So it's a piece of a necklace. He's perplexed by it because it's not of the time period. So he starts digging himself into a hole, and he finds, I guess it's a piece of a figurine that's like the head of a demon. Yep,
it is the head of what we find out is Pazuzu.
We find that out?
Yeah, Pazuzu is the demon that is possessing Reagan.
When do they say this word?
I don't remember, to be honest with you. I don't even know. Maybe it'll come up in my notes. Maybe they don't. Maybe it's just like lore that I know as a horror fan. I'll find out for you. But the demon is Pazuzu.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, I have called it the devil through all of my notes, so that's what I'll be saying. Pazuzu. Okay.
Pazuzu.
That's even more Buffy-like. All right. So the next scene is in town. So still in northern Iraq, but we're in like a marketplace, or we're just, in a town, and he's sitting outside at a restaurant. He's shaking, so he opens up a pill box to take one, and that seemingly immediately provides relief for him. So I don't quite know what's wrong with him, but...
Yeah, they don't really specify. And at this point in the movie, you're kind of like, okay, like, is this a health issue because he's old? Is he maybe affected by this statue that he found? Is he shaken? What's going on? It asks a couple questions that it doesn't immediately answer.
At first, it looks like he's people watching, but as it goes on, especially when a server comes over to kind of ask if he wants anything else, it seems like he's kind of dissociating. He's just staring out into space.
Yeah, he's not having a good time.
So he pays and leaves. We follow him through the marketplace, and this was weird. He just makes eye contact with a blacksmith, and that's the end. Like, what? I don't understand what we're doing here. So at this point, we are 2 minutes in, and I'm already confused completely.
Well, so it was 6 minutes, and the only reason I have that is I marked the time because as they transition that scene, it just happened very suddenly, as you said, and you yelled a little bit for the first time. So 6 minutes in, you yelped.
What did I yelp at?
Like the screen transition from the blacksmith. Like I think it was the sound of the blacksmith striking iron, and you're like, "Oh so no, dumb. This is terrible."
Wow. Okay.
Yes, it was dumb.
Wow. Well, we don't even know that he's a priest right now. We have no idea what he's doing. I thought he was going to go see a local person about what he found and kind of like talk to them about this artifact, but Next, we see him inside looking at the pieces and talking to another man who never gets introduced as anything. Now, I missed that as he's inspecting the pieces, the clock actually stops in the room.
Yeah, it's one of those, it's a hanging wall clock that has a pendulum, and the pendulum just straight up stops as he's inspecting the head of the statue.
I guess I was just too confused, wondering, what are we doing? Next, they're outside saying goodbye, and the man says, I wish you didn't have to leave, but apparently he has other things to do. They embrace, and that's that.
That is that.
We move on, following him as he walks, and he walks through a tunnel, marketplace, and then back outside. He almost gets run over by a horse buggy. And I guess this is to show us that he's distracted. Yeah,
and I think also to, reinforce that they're in Iraq, which is the horse buggy capital of the world.
Of course, yeah. Next, he's in a desert over a crumbling tower. There are men with guns, but they allow him in for some reason. He sees a statue, so kind of above, maybe on a roof or something. He climbs up to get a better look. And at the same time, two dogs start just very aggressively fighting. The sound is awful. It's so loud. I hate that sound of dogs fighting. And then the statue is a demon, maybe similar to the one he found at the site.
It is the same demon. Yes, it is a statue of Pazuzu, and this entire shot between him kind of staring at the statue and also the dogs fighting in the background is quite a big amount of foreshadowing the events to come.
I, with an English degree, was not thinking foreshadowing. I was just what the fuck is happening? Why is any of this happening? Who are these men with guns? Why are they letting him in? What is this place? What are we doing? It was all very unclear to me.
Yeah, I kind of put it together after the fact. I mean, not on this watch, obviously, but there's a scene later in the movie when the possession first kind of rears its head. And you also have a couple of people acting out of character aggressively, similar to the dogs. And I think it kind of tells you that this demon sows discord.
God. Okay. I'm going to complain about that scene later, but I now know which one you're talking about. And that makes sense. But are we just supposed to know that?
I mean, I picked up on it.
Wow. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I have a degree technically in analyzing literature, but...
Well, this is film.
Whatever. Okay, so we're done in Iraq. We are now in Georgetown. Which, are we saying in Georgetown or at Georgetown? Is Georgetown a place or is it just the university?
I have no idea. I don't have the foggiest idea.
Okay.
I think you can use either, and somebody that went to Georgetown will tweet at us telling us we were wrong.
Probably. Chris, or Mom, she's in her room and she hears a noise. So she puts on a robe and goes to inspect.
Hold on. I got to pause you right there because she is in full pajamas. Okay, she's got slippers, long pants, a full shirt on, and she still puts on a robe, which is just crazy to me. The robe is for when you're not dressed decently, but she is dressed perfectly fine. And she still puts on this robe to go see her daughter. Blows my mind.
Well, you never know. I mean, we find out later she has a staff, and one includes a man, so can't see her braless probably.
I guess. Yeah, I guess I hadn't considered the bra thing.
It is 1973.
That is my male privilege, having never had to wear a bra, so it didn't even occur to me.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Well, she looks at the attic entrance in the ceiling, and she thinks it's coming from there. She just checks in on her daughter, Reagan. The window's open, which is going to be a repeated thing. It's cold, so she closes it and just kind of, wraps her up in very typical parent stuff there. Next, it's the morning. That's when we discover that our main characters are rich because they have a staff. There's a woman cooking in the kitchen, and Carl, I guess he manages the property. That's kind of what I gathered.
Yeah, he seems like the groundskeeper type person,
Exactly.
Even though it's the middle of DC, so there aren't really grounds, but he seems to have that kind of role in the house.
She tells Carl they have rats and he needs to set traps. He insists they don't, but she tells him to do it. Now, I'm just thinking rats is a interesting choice to say. It's not mice. You would say there are mice in the house. But I guess it's because the noise was kind of loud. So for it to be mice, there would be thousands of mice to make that noise, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And also they're in the city. I feel like rats are in the city, mice are in the country.
Yeah,
so
right, duh.
Yeah.
Good point. So we're on set. Mom is an actress. That's what we've learned. The camera pans to all of the non-actors, not even background people. They're just people who are on scene because it's outside in a city. Specifically to the priest smiling. The priest being Father Karras.
Yeah, this is the first time we see Father Karras, but it is a weird introduction.
It's so weird.
He's smiling. He's kind of looking at Chris, and you don't really know who he is yet, and they don't have any relationship. We don't know that at this point in the movie, but like it is established later on that they don't know each other. So it's just very strange to me that he's just happens to be there smiling directly at Chris.
And the way that the camera is set on him, like centered around all these people, it just kind of came off as weird and almost a little creepy. If he wasn't a priest, I guess I would be like, are you here to murder us? Not to say that a priest couldn't murder someone, but...
Yeah, I mean, we've never heard of any priest ever doing anything wrong.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I guess it's just an establishing shot to introduce him. We watch her film a scene, and then the priest, again, we see as he's leaving, but he stops to look back. And again, it's like, why? What are these shots? I don't understand. There's a lot of that, of just, it almost seems ominous, but you don't know why. Then she walks home from set, and that's where we hear the music.
Yes, the music. Oh, the music is like, that theme is still just like gets into the heart of you and inspires fear for me.
But the timing of it too, I thought it was too soon because nothing scary happens after this. I thought it would be a lead-in, but I guess it was more of just a warning.
Yeah, I think it's just trying to set a tone, really.
She walks by a church and spots the same priest. She stops and she looks perplexed or concerned. Her brow is furrowed, and all he's doing is talking to somebody else, right? So once again, I don't understand why this is weird for her or what the point of her facial expression was.
I must have missed it if there is an explanation for that because I don't really know either.
She gets home, and this is where she talks with Reagan about her day. Reagan went horseback riding, and she really, really wants a horse. And they keep talking, and it eventually leads to some, like, playful horsing around.
See, that was a big red flag for me because are we sure she's possessed in this movie? Because, like, have you ever met a horse girl? Horse girls are, I mean, if you told me they were possessed by demons, I would 100% believe you. Horse girls have a rep, and it is well-deserved.
I don't know the rap that you're talking about. But anyway, back to the scene. This was really just to show us that Reagan is your average preteen girl. She wants a horse. She loves her mom. They have a great relationship. Just to stress how much things eventually change. We jump to a train station. Father Karras is heading somewhere, but before he gets on the train, a homeless man says, "Help an old altar boy. I'm Catholic." And he just looks bothered and gets on the train. We follow him to kind of like a rundown neighborhood and into an apartment building, which he's very clearly familiar with. So he's going somewhere that he knows. We find out that's his mother's house, where he seems to visit as often as he can. But ultimately, he tries to encourage her to probably move into something like assisted living. But she's stubborn and just refuses.
Yeah. She's crying. She's very much like a, old mom from the old country, and she's pleading, "Please, Demi, don't do this to me." It's
exactly.
It's sad.
Very dramatic. She's worried, but he is worried about her because she's recently injured herself on the stairs. So she's basically too old to care for herself, really.
So as he's leaving, he leaves a little money on the table for his mom. And Briana, unprompted, says, "It's probably from the communion plate." And I just said, wow. And then she just said, I won't even repeat what she said because it's probably one too over the line for me, but it was something to the effects of, "Have you ever seen Spotlight?" So.
No, that's only half true. We're back at the house with Mom and Reagan. They're in the basement where Reagan has just a full-on craft area. And they don't live in this house, by the way. This is like rented for her time on the set.
Yeah. So earlier in the movie, I don't think you mentioned it, but there's like a scene where she's talking to her housekeeper and they mention how she was invited to dinner at the White House.
Oh, yeah.
So it's kind of implied that she's a pretty big deal as an actress throughout the course of this movie. So this house is probably provided by the studio, or maybe it's just like one of like several properties that she maintains because she's rich and who cares?
True. Well, she finds a Ouija board and asks Reagan where she found it. And she says that she found it in a closet. And she teaches her mom how to use it. And saying that she talks to Captain Howdy.
Captain Howdy. And also, I just would like to note that when Mom found the Ouija board, it was a very regular scene. Like, there was no tense buildup. There was no, like, what is she going to find? She just finds it, and it's not tense at all. And Brianna gasped when she saw the Ouija board. She was immediately like, I figured out the whole plot of this movie, and now I know where they all went wrong, and they are such fools because that will never happen to me.
Well, I was going to say it did scare me because I was like, don't fuck with it. Like, just don't. Okay, it's very simple. Just you don't play with Ouija boards, especially she's already spoken to someone on it. She's named Captain Howdy, but they don't take it seriously. Like Jason just said, they don't take it seriously. She asks, is my mom, Captain Howdy, do you think my mom is pretty? And they just kind of laugh and think it's funny.
Yeah.
It's not funny.
I can't help but think, if this is kind of, say, the beginning of the creepy kid genre. You've got this kid who at this point in the movie is very innocent. And even, Captain Howdy is an innocent name. That's not a threatening name. You're not going to be afraid of something called Captain Howdy. And so I wonder if not for this little setup there, do we have things like Children of the Corn and Damien and anything you've ever seen with a creepy kid slowly singing a nursery rhyme? That was like the vibe I got from this.
Really? Yeah. I'd never found her to be creepy at all, even when she was kind of, the devil.
Captain Howdy's creepy. I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, that is creepy, of course. I'm kind of speaking of her though. I thought she was not very good.
Yeah, you noted it in this scene. I haven't noted too. You said Linda Blair is a terrible actress,
That's
and
not what I said.
Those were your exact words.
Wow.
And I think not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I think you and I very much disagree on a lot of things about this movie, and that being one of them.
Well, yes, but I just think she didn't get much of an opportunity because the dialogue is short, it's often mumbled, and seemingly inconsequential. Like a lot of this build up to what is really the meat of the movie is just, so she didn't really have much opportunity to do anything with it. So I'm not blaming her, a child. I'm blaming the writers and director.
Mm-hmm. Brianna has a history of being mean to children.
That's not true. None of this is true.
You should not watch Teen Week on Jeopardy with Brianna. That's all I'm saying.
I can't help it if they're annoying sometimes. And I've never said anything on a public forum, and now you have forced my hand. This is a public forum.
You should act the way in private you want people to see you in public.
Next, Mom puts her to bed, and they discuss what they'll do on her birthday that's coming up. Reagan says that Mom can bring her friend, Mr. Burke, who's the director of the movie that she's working on. Mom kind of plays it off as like, oh, we're just friends. He doesn't need to join us on your birthday, your special day. But I guess, this helps to establish officially that she's a single mom.
Yes, yeah. And I also think Reagan kind of pushes the point here a little bit. She's like, no, like, I know you have feelings for him. I know you like him. It was my personal belief that Captain Howdy kind of told her that.
Why?
Why does a demon do anything? To sow discord.
Huh, okay. The next scene is two priests walk into a bar. Just kidding. That sounds like the setup of a joke. But, I mean, they are at a bar. They're at a table talking. And it's Father Karras and another who is Father Dwyer. Karras says that he might want out of the priesthood because he's struggling with his faith. And the other is just trying to, I don't know, they're buddies. So they're just having a conversation. Again, there's no reason for it. Next, Mom is on the phone.
I mean, well, I think...
Okay, I lied. There is reason
Yeah,
for
I was going to say,
yeah.
I think a priest who later in this movie will perform an exorcism having a crisis of faith that's a big deal. That's worth noting, I would say.
Next, Mom is on the phone. She's yelling at someone trying to get in touch with Reagan's father because he failed to call her on her birthday. And then the camera pans out and we see that Reagan's hearing this conversation and she just kind of frustratingly leaves the scene. Then we jump to the night. The phone rings, so it's the middle of the night. Mom is sleeping, but she wakes up from the phone. Now, she has a whole kind of conversation on the phone. I didn't understand anything that she was saying, but it doesn't matter because the point of the scene is not the phone call. The point of the scene is what happens because she woke up. So I guess it was a weird choice that there was a phone call. They could have just had her wake up from like a scary dream, but they made it a phone call.
Yeah, they called her to schedule reshoots.
Okay. You hear better than I do. I don't know. I couldn't hear what she was saying. It was just mumbling.
Well.
Anyway, the mom finds that Reagan has crawled into her bed. And she said that it was because her whole bed was shaking. Then they hear that same scratching noise that they heard from before and also some rattling. So Mom gets up to inspect. And this time she opens the attic entrance in the ceiling, which is a choice because considering you think that there's rats and they're actively rattling the door, 100 rats could have just fallen on her face.
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime you open an attic door, that is a risk you're choosing to take. We're thankful it worked out for her this time.
That's why I don't open attic doors.
Well, it's also funny to me because she brings a candle up there, and this is 1973. Like they have flashlights, so the candle was an interesting decision to me.
I looked it up. Flashlights have been well established. They started in the 1890s, so.
Yeah, well, she had 80 years to get a flashlight and really dropped the ball, I guess.
So she just kind of goes through the attic, and of course it's kind of a scary scene because we're seeing her perspective, basically, which is the light of a candle. She sees the traps, which are empty, so that's confusing for her because she's like, why am I hearing these noises? I know it's rats, but the traps are empty. She hears the noise again, so she walks toward it, and as she's walking toward it, the candle flames up like a flamethrower. And at the same time, Carl surprises her from another entrance.
Carl being the groundskeeper gentleman.
Yes, and he just is like, see, no rats.
Yeah, I love that he's just like up at 2 a.m. to rub it in her face that there are no rats in the attic. He's like, I told you.
At the next scene, we are at church.
Oh, wait, real quick. Also, that was 33 minutes in, and as the candle flared up, you screamed.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that was scary. I mean, I thought a lot more was going to happen in that scene, so. At church, a priest we've never seen before and will never see again is bringing a couple flower bouquets to freshen up what is, the dreary medieval altar of the Catholic Church, and finds the statue of Mary defaced. Her breasts have black cones on them, and I likened them to traffic cones. Like, they're black, but then the tips of them are orange. And then her stomach is covered in red paint, like blood, and there's also a horn stabbing through the stomach. Paint on her hands, so it's like a bloody mess.
Yeah, and that was really creepy. Like that shot of the defaced statue, that's a 10/10 for me. Like that is an image that stayed in my mind from the first time I saw the movie.
Yeah, I didn't like that, but I also was wondering, what is that? Is it an omen? If so, like, who did it? Was this, what's the devil's name again? The demon?
Pazuzu.
Was it Pazuzu, or is it because Pazuzu is in the air, so it's causing other people to lash out? Or is it just so happens someone decided to do this?
It was a couple of teenagers playing a prank completely unrelated to the rest of the movie, actually.
That's not true, probably.
No, that's not true at all. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the mystery, is they don't really say whether it was done by a human hand influenced by Pazuzu or Pazuzu himself, or, they don't really ever clear that up, and that's fine for me.
Well, our next scene is at a doctor's office, and Reagan is getting blood taken in a series of seemingly basic tests. I think one of them is like an EKG. And in this, we get a flash of the devil.
The devil.
As they're testing her reflexes, the doctor asks her a couple times if she feels it, and eventually she responds and she says, I feel nothing, in a tone very similar to that.
Yeah, she was the first goth kid, I think. It's really what this shot establishes.
As they do more tests, she's growing increasingly irritated. They try to take her temperature and she rips it out. Then as the nurse is preparing something, we don't really see what, she starts moving around the room aimlessly and humming very strangely. And this was creepy kid stuff right here.
Oh, for sure.
It was weird. Like the way she was moving her body, it was almost dance-like, but it was creepy because of the weird humming. But it did lead me to wonder how much time has passed since like the last time we saw Reagan, because there was nothing wrong with her until suddenly there was something wrong with her. So,
well, I think Chris took her there because she said her bed was shaking. So to Chris, that's like she has some sort of hallucination. She has some sort of issue. I want to get this checked out.
The doctors diagnose her with a nerve disorder and say that all of the symptoms, including the personality changes that have apparently been going on, and her temper, match. So they prescribe her Ritalin.
Which I didn't know existed in 1973.
Yeah,
to me,
I was surprised.
Ritalin is an 80s medication. So shows how little I know.
It's suggested that she may be depressed, but there's no need to take steps of psychology next.
Yeah, so Chris asks the doctor twice if, like, hey, should I just take her to see a psychiatrist? And the doctor both times is just like incredulous and offended. He's like, no, don't you ever take her to a psychiatrist. We'll handle this with Ritalin. If you send her to a psychiatrist, they're just going to have you do all this stuff first anyway.
Yeah, let's see if the pills work first.
Yeah, he is just so threatened by the idea of a psychiatrist.
So the mom adds that she's been lying, and the doctor says that she's been swearing, and the mother is shocked by this. And so she asks what she said, and the doctor says, I don't even want to say this. I'm going to make you say it.
I'll say it. Yeah, I'll say it. At one point when he was examining her, Reagan said, "Keep your fingers away from my goddamn cunt." And much like Briana just now, Chris's first reaction is to try not to laugh, which I feel like is the correct reaction.
Yeah.
Like if that just comes out of left field from a 12-year-old, that's hilarious. I'm sorry. After he tells her that, she's like, "Are you sure I shouldn't take her to see a psychiatrist?" And the doctor, "No, absolutely not."
Yeah, he's like, "Let's wait and see." It's here where I started kind of wondering what the overall theme of this movie was. And throughout the film, I was just reminded of that question. And I'll talk more about this at the end, sort of in our review section. But I also just think it's kind of funny that, you know, the devil possessing a girl is just swearing to a doctor, like dropping that C word.
Yeah, I mean, vulgarity is
devilish.
Yeah, and it's continuing theme of this movie. A lot of the personality changes, a lot of the possessed actions we see from Reagan are just incredibly vulgar. And I think that was, you know, a choice to make it shocking and upsetting because, yes, we still have some stigma around the C word here, but like you didn't just say that. People were a lot more offended by swear words back then than we are today, I guess.
Yeah. Well, checking back in with Father Karras, he is at a psych hospital with a family member who told him that I think that his mother fell again, and for some reason she couldn't go to like a regular hospital and had to go to a psychiatric hospital. Yeah,
so it was his mother's brother. So it was his uncle. He's upset that the uncle brought his mom here. And this, you know, the shots of this hospital really established this is not a good place. Like this isn't a care home. This isn't like a really nice assisted living facility. This is exactly what you would expect a mental hospital before, you know, we really knew a lot about mental issues to look like.
Right.
It's a rough scene to watch.
Yeah, it's definitely that stereotypical psych hospital that we've seen time and time again, especially, I guess, in older films too, about, or that just make you feel uncomfortable and like they just give mental health kind of a bad name.
Yeah, and one other weird thing about this scene for me was that, you know, he's walking through the ward towards the back to where his mother is, and a couple of patients, you know, come up to him, try to talk to him, try to grab him, and staff like separates them and stuff. And they all call him father, even though at this point he's not wearing his white collar. And I was just wondering, maybe it's the black suit, maybe he just looks like a priest, but I found that really weird.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. When he reaches his mother kind of at the end of the room, she's bedridden and she is upset. She is just like, "Why did you do this to me?" She refuses to look at him despite him insisting repeatedly, like, "We'll get you back home. We'll get you back home." It's really sad. Next, we get a very, very short boxing scene with Father Karras. It's been mentioned that he boxes regularly, and so he's obviously just getting out his frustration. So again, with this short scene, I couldn't help but wonder, you know, why are we seeing this? Obviously, that previous moment was very sad. We didn't need more to get across that point. I did a lot of reading on Peter Blatty for what I'm going to talk about later. After reading some things about him, I kind of looked at this scene a little differently. I thought that it was meant to show that this isn't just a story about what happens to Reagan, but more a story about how what happened to Reagan affected everybody else.
Yeah, I think Father Karras is kind of the low-key protagonist of this movie. Chris is this Hollywood star. Reagan is a possessed child. And then, you know, the two of them and Father Karras make up the bulk of the screen time. Obviously, a lot of us can't relate to a priest, but what we can relate to is somebody who's struggling with personal issues, somebody who's struggling with keeping their faith, even though they should believe and they want to believe. They're not sure they do. And I think that Father Karras is really just kind of the centerpiece of this movie that gets lost in the exorcism.
Hullabaloo.
Yeah.
Well, next is a party scene at Reagan's house, but it's adults only, so she's technically upstairs sleeping. Priests are just mixing and mingling, and this is where you explained to me that Georgetown is like a Catholic university, and I was like, oh, that's why they're just chilling.
I think Briana was very confused. She's like, why is this actress friends with all these priests?
Yeah, it didn't make sense.
Yeah.
But so two priests are talking, and one tells the other that Father Karras's mother has died.
And they say it was a few days ago, too. So yeah. I feel like they do that a lot in this movie where they kind of just go scene to scene and then they, you know, kind of establish that a few days have passed. Mm-hmm. So this movie isn't kind of just like you see every moment of a week. It's over the course of time. And there are periods of inactivity that they don't show.
Then we have the scene that you alluded to earlier. This is the weird fight between an obviously drunk Burke, the director of the film that Chris is in, and Carl, the groundskeeper, who is just the sweetest man. So it was super strange. And before you pointed anything out about this, I thought this had absolutely no point at all.
Yeah, well, there were two things. The first is shortly after the scene, spoiler alert, is kind of when I would say evil Reagan rears her head in public to Chris for the first time, where we see the possessed child clearly for the first time.
Yeah.
And I don't really think it's a coincidence. I think that they're fighting because the demon is now establishing its presence in the home. But other than that, I also would say both of these gentlemen are old enough with the time period to have fought in World War II. So maybe Burke is British and Carl is German. So, maybe this fight is also just like, hey, I fought in World War II and you're a German, so up yours.
Didn't pick up on either of those things either. So
Thank God you have me here. How did you watch movies before we met?
I don't know. I watched comedies. You don't need a lot of thought with those. All right. So Burke gets hauled off in a cab. Did I just call him Bert?
Probably.
Burke, with a K, is hauled off in a cab. Mom goes in to check in on Reagan. She kisses her and she leaves. Reagan opens her eyes. But of course, only we see that. The mom doesn't. Next, they're all singing around a piano played by Father Dwyer.
This is peak white people. Like, I need somebody who has lived through this time period to send us a DM or tweet at us or something. Like, did people actually do this? Like, did you go to house parties and just stand around a piano and everybody sang together? Because that is the weirdest thing I've ever seen.
Let's do it. Let's get a piano. You want a keyboard for Christmas, so let's get a keyboard and we'll just have house parties with salads and sing around a piano.
Salads?
I was thinking those salads from the 50s that are like Jell-O and marshmallows, but I couldn't come up with what they're called.
Oh, is that aspic?
No. Someone's yelling it.
It's aspic.
I don't think it is. Anyway, let's do it. But this is where demonic Reagan comes down the stairs. She just ominously interrupts the party with, "You're going to die up there." Is that what she says? Yeah,
there's a gentleman who is standing a little bit further from the pack in the doorway, and he is the only one not singing. So I am assuming the proxy for the viewer, because we wouldn't be singing either. And she just looks him right in the eye and says, "You're gonna die up there." No, you don't know what up there is. We don't know who this guy is, but she just looks him right in the eyeballs, to the windows of his soul, and says it.
And then just pees on the carpet.
Yeah, lots of pee.
Mom says, "Not again." So we know that this has happened before. And the next scene is her giving Reagan a bath. And she tries to talk to her, but she just receives no response. And I think this just shows us how drastically their relationship has changed.
Yeah, for sure. The earlier conversations kind of painted this picture of Chris as a very good mom. I feel like your instincts, you kind of assume that a famous actress wouldn't be a good mom. No offense to any actresses out there, but often in movies and stuff, when the mom has some very high profile job, she's often not a good mom. But they kind of establish a really great relationship between Chris and Reagan. And now it's sort of shifted to, there's this distance, but Chris is still taking care of Reagan, even though their relationship isn't what it was.
And as she's putting her to bed, Reagan says, "Mother, what's wrong with me?" And she just reassures her by saying, "You'll be fine, and you just got to take your medication."
The fact that she called her mother probably should have been a tip-off that she was possessed by the demon.
Yeah.
Because no regular child calls their mom mother.
Well, Mom goes downstairs to check in on the maid, who is working hard to clean out that spot on the carpet. And Reagan screams. And so she runs back into the bedroom to find the bed shaking, bumping, and jumping while Reagan just screams on the bed.
Yeah, and so this is, the first time it happened, we don't see it. Chris doesn't see it, and Chris kind of assumes there's something wrong with Reagan. But at this point, Chris and us have seen it. This bed is just shaking, practically lifting off the ground by itself. So now is sort of when the movie turns from, is this child disturbed, to, we have a clear possession here.
One of the priests at the party was Father Dwyer, and I think he was in the conversation about that Father Karras's mother has died.
Yeah, so Father Dwyer is, I don't remember exactly. I don't remember if he's the dean of the university or if he's the archbishop. He's somebody he's basically in charge. He's basically Father Karras's boss at Georgetown.
But they have a very buddy-buddy relationship.
Yeah, for sure. He's his boss, but he's also his friend. I would argue the only friend that we see Father Karras have through the course of this movie.
Yeah. And he goes to Father Karras to check on him because he's heard the news. Father Karras is drunk and sad and smoking. And really, Dwyer just encourages him to sleep. And I just think, again, he goes in to check on him as a friend. And he's a little playful with him because he is drunk.
Yeah, and then, the scene ends and Karras is kind of passed out because he brought this whiskey with him. Dwyer brought this whiskey with him, and Karras is passed out, and Father Dwyer just kind of like tucks him into bed and leaves. But one thing that bothered me in that scene is that Father Karras is smoking, and when Father Dwyer starts taking care of Father Karras, he just takes his cigarette and just starts smoking it himself, which maybe it's just COVID, but I was like, oh God, no, please don't.
Well, Father Karras falls asleep, but he has a dream. He dreams of the coin necklace. It's kind of like falling in the air. There's a dog running, and we see the stopped clock from the beginning. And his mother is coming up from a train stop, and she's calling out to him. The devil face flashes. Father Karras is like across the street, and he's trying to get to her. And it kind of seems like it's one of those dreams where like he's never going to be able to get to where he needs to go. We pop back over to the doctor's office where Regan is not being an ideal patient, I would say. And then we just pop back over to the church to see Father Karras holding mass, which I guess is to show that, despite the hardships, he's still doing what he needs to do regarding his faith and his job, all of that. Back at the doctor's, Mom is in the hallway talking to one of the doctors. And of course, she's super concerned. He says it's an issue in the brain and suggests that the bed shaking was actually her body spasming. Mom insists that the entire bed was shaking, but the doctor really just deflects that and says the problem isn't with her bed, it's with her brain.
This is actually a scene that I took a little issue with because I can't help but wonder if the mom firmly believes that the bed was shaking and it wasn't Regan causing it, why is she at the doctor and not at a priest or somebody who isn't going to immediately dismiss any sort of claim of the supernatural?
Because anytime we're dealing with the supernatural in scary movies, we go science first. We've learned that.
Well, I know. It didn't make much sense to me. If she's so sure that this is like legitimate, then why are you still listening to somebody who thinks it's an issue mentally with Regan?
You never believe science more than when the answer is supernatural.
That's fair, I guess.
They conclude, although conclusion is not the best word to use, I guess, but that's what they're concluding for now, which is that she has lesions on her temporal lobe, and that's causing a seizure disorder. So they run more very intense tests on Regan. There's like some kind of injection to her neck. I thought maybe it's like a spinal tap, but I assume they go through the spine to do a spinal tap. But it is, I have a word for it later.
Well, I know what it is.
You know?
Yeah. So it's contrast fluid because she's getting an MRI. She's getting a brain scan.
It's neither of those things.
Really?
It is a cerebral angiography. That's the spurting blood that we see. They also do a PEG.
Oh, that shot. When it's okay. Yeah, I misunderstood. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. The whole medical scene here is very cold. It is very loud and uncomfortable looking. All of this effort to then conclude, that there's nothing wrong with her brain. So they just keep doing tests over and over to no conclusion. Back at home, Regan is in bed screaming and gasping and throwing herself up and down all over the bed. So Mom calls for the doctor, who comes immediately because clearly he needs to see this in order to be taking it seriously. When the doctor comes into the bedroom, Regan's eyes roll back in her head, fully white. She growls and gets up and punches the doctor. Then she flashes everyone, I think. Obviously, we don't see it because she's a child, but it seems like she flashes everyone and then says, "Fuck me," over and over.
Again, this is just a scene that was really creepy for me. Like the vibe of it, just like it's very unsettling. There is something really unnerving about seeing a 12-year-old girl screaming, "Fuck me." That scene creeps me out. Still does.
To resolve this, the doctors sedate her. Now they're suggesting it's some kind of like adrenaline. They draw the comparison of a mother lifting a car to save her baby. And I'm just like, First of all, no. Second of all, has that story ever happened? It is 1973, and we are talking about the mother lifting the car. We've been talking about this, mentioning this forever. Why do people use that example? I need to know the story of the mother who lifted the car to save her child.
I mean, I just assume it actually happened. I've never looked it up.
It's one woman who has just lived in infamy.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think I heard school bus. I don't think I heard car. I think I heard somebody lifted a school bus, but maybe I'm misremembering. The other great thing about this scene, too, is like after all this transpires, Chris again to the doctor broaches the idea of taking her to see a psychiatrist.
Yes.
And the doctor's still like, absolutely not.
Right. He says, but any psychiatrist would exhaust the somatic symptoms first. And then, there's two doctors right now, and one of them says there's only 100 cases of split personality disorder. But also, have they not exhausted all options at this point? Like,
maybe it's just, the way we grew up, the times we live in. But if I see a child screaming, fuck me, fuck me, fuck me, and punching adults in the face all the time, the first thing I'm going to do is get her mental health help.
Well, the mom just breaks at this point, insisting it's not her fucking brain. And they say they're going to do the test again. Again, this is just another scene where I'm like, these tests look medieval. They're raw metal and harsh and loud. It's just like she's in like a room with just all this machinery and she's alone, and she's, I think, crying or sweating or both. And that was very unsettling. And of course, those tests come back normal. The doctor now asks the mom if she keeps any drugs in the house. And it's like, shouldn't that have maybe been a question in the beginning? Like, did she accidentally take some drugs that she shouldn't have taken? Like no, LSD or whatever he's suggesting.
And I loved her response, which was like, no, I don't even smoke grass.
Oh, she said that?
Yeah, which is great. Because I assume, in her like kind of like artist circle, I'm sure it's super popular. So she's just saying like, all my friends do, but I don't. But I just loved it. It was such a response of the times.
Well, now, after all this, the doctor finally agrees it's time to look into a psychiatrist. So the mom drives home, and near home, she passes by like a bunch of emergency vehicles. It looks like an accident. That's what I initially thought of. And in fact, until we find out what it was, I didn't even write notes about it because I was like, okay, whatever, this is just an accident. But she goes into the house and the phone is ringing. No one's there. We get another flash of the devil when like the lights are kind of start flashing.
And another scream from Briana.
For sure. She checks in on Reagan. The window, once again, is wide open. It's freezing. She closes it. She covers up Reagan and she leaves. We see Sharon, who is maybe like a nanny or...
Yeah, she seems like a nanny or a maid, a housekeeper.
Unclear job, but she's there. She returns, and the mom freaks out, questioning why she would have left her alone. So Sharon was supposed to be home with Reagan. But Sharon says she had to go pick up prescriptions, and she, in fact, didn't leave her alone. She was left with Burke. But unclear, like, did Burke just show up?
No, Sharon called Burke. Sharon had to go, so she called Burke to come and watch Reagan.
Okay, so they, I guess, have a close relationship. Okay. Unfortunately, the medical scene that we passed was Burke, who had fallen down a long set of stairs by the house. He broke his neck, and he's dead.
He is dead. And there is some very uncomfortable physical contact with the gentleman who showed up to give them the news. I don't know if you remember this, if you saw it or noted it, but Chris is just like kind of standing against the wall, like crying. And this man comes up and like just sort of puts his hand on her shoulder very awkwardly. And like it sits there for a minute and then he just leaves. And it was the weirdest thing to me. And I guess, I would also feel awkward in that situation, but I like to think I do a little better than that.
Meanwhile, it's about to get more awkward because Reagan is just in a full back bend, crawling down the stairs at a abnormally high speed, and blood is just spewing out of her mouth.
Yeah, that's one of the scenes that was added in the theatrical cut that came out, 30 years later. I don't believe it was in the original. And it is, it's really cool. It's creepy, but they didn't have the best special effects. And it's obviously just Reagan, like in real time, just going down really slow. And then they sped up the footage. So it doesn't look, it looks fake and it looks a little silly. It almost would have been better if they did kind of like a stuttery stop motion thing, similar to they do in The Grudge or The Ring.
Yeah, I think because we've
at the
seen
time
it done better since.
Yeah,
that it's
exactly
hard to go back.
Exactly.
I will say the blood coming out of her mouth, like her whole facial expression was creepy. So
Oh, yeah.
it still had an effect. For sure.
Oh, yeah. I'm not, the walking was a little silly, but the scene as a whole is definitely still creepy.
The next scene is Reagan, the doctor's mom, and a psychiatrist who has basically hypnotized her. Check in on Reagan's physicality, by the way. She is pale, tired, chapped lips. She needs some lip balm.
Oh, her lips over the course of this movie just get worse and worse to the point where I was just like compulsively licking my own lips for the entire second half of this film.
During the hypnosis, he asks, "Is there someone inside you?" And she says, "Sometimes." And he asks if it's Captain Howdy. And then he says he will now speak directly to whoever is inside her and asks that they come forward. A picture falls off the wall, and then Reagan starts growling and her face changes. She lunges and grabs the hypnotist or the psychiatrist, his crotch, and he just kind of very dramatically falls back. And she doesn't let go until she's pulled away. On campus, Father Karras is running laps, and a man is watching until Karras stops running. The man introduces himself as a detective specializing in homicide, and he talks to him about Burke's death. He thinks it's mysterious because his head was actually turned completely around. And so he asks him about witchcraft. Karras says he did a paper on witchcraft from a psychological perspective. So he's a priest, but he has, a science background, which is an interesting combination.
Yeah, his job at the university is actually he's like the school psychiatrist.
Right. And the cop asks if the defacement at the church has anything to do with witchcraft. Now, I just thought this was a strange conversation with a weird guy. Like, the detective is a weirdo. But it's also strange that he would just jump right to witchcraft. Like, meanwhile, Reagan is possessed by a demon, very obviously. And we're going through all of this science to figure it out. And this cop is just like, hey, it's probably witchcraft.
I mean, he's the only guy with his head on right in this entire movie.
Well, the conversation ends with the cop inviting the Father Karras to the movies, but he declines and he gets kind of pissed and he threatens him with deportation.
Yeah, this is a really weird scene. It definitely comes back later in the movie. The cop is just like, hey, do you want to go see a movie? I like seeing movies. And he names a movie, and Father Karras is like, I've seen it already. And that's like his rejection, which is just a really good way of rejecting that question. But yeah, I never really got that scene.
Yeah. The next scene is several doctors meeting with Mom, and they say that the possession is an alien force. But they don't mean like real aliens.
Yeah, no, they mean alien in terms of like an outside object, sort of like illegal aliens.
Yeah. They're suggesting putting her away, but Mom is adamantly against that. And then they inquire about her religious beliefs, and they don't have any. So they talk to her about exorcisms.
They basically suggest the exorcism as a placebo treatment, which I think was really well done. I think that that's just a really interesting way of going about it, because in so many supernatural movies, you either have people who don't believe in supernatural even in the face of like big evidence, or you have people that believe in the supernatural 100% full stop. But this I felt like was a more realistic approach. Like, maybe even somebody who didn't believe in the supernatural would agree to this as a placebo, which I really appreciated.
Right. Almost like the issue here is delusion. Like, if you can believe that you can be possessed, you can believe that you can become unpossessed.
Yeah. And I love that personally, because I feel like if the movie goes the entire way up to this point and he just says, okay, well, she's possessed, it probably takes me out of the movie. I lose my suspension of disbelief a little bit. So I really appreciate that scene.
Yeah. So as they go home, Reagan is completely wrapped up in blankets and she's taken inside. And it's in this moment where I just acknowledge that Chris, the mom, she's a celebrity. And how nice it is that she can go through this hardship, this horror, without TMZ and the paparazzi up her ass. Like, what a privilege. The 70s. Good times.
Yeah. I mean, the 70s were pretty awful for a lot of people in a lot of ways, but that's definitely one improvement.
Next, the cop is inspecting the steps. So the steps that Burke had fallen down and died. It's a long stairwell. The movie itself was filmed at Georgetown, and these steps are real. People actually go to these steps to see that scene. Here he finds the bottom half of a figurine, probably the bottom half of what Father Merrin found in Iraq.
Yeah, for sure. That is the other half of the Pazuzu statue.
Pazuzu. Meanwhile, Mom is putting Reagan to bed and finds a cross under her pillow. So she takes that and inquires with staff, but none of them admit to having put it there. So the cop is climbing the stairs, and he notes kind of the trajectory from Reagan's window, essentially, to the steps. So he goes to the house to meet, at this point to him, whoever lives there, and talks with Chris. So she explains that Burke was here, but he had left. The cop thinks it's strange that he would have come and stayed for like 20 minutes and then abandoned a sick girl. He suggests that he was killed and pushed out of the window. He's not making any accusations that like Reagan did it, but he just thinks someone else was in that room with them.
Yeah, and he notes how Burke's head was turned 180 degrees, and he says the odds of that happening from falling down the stairs is only 1 in 1,000, which I was like, that doesn't sound that high to me. Like, how many people fall downstairs a day, and 1 in 1,000 get their head turned 180 degrees around? I mean, I don't think that that's true anyway, but like, if those are the actual odds, then you don't need to investigate this because that totally happens.
The cop kind of ends it with encouraging Chris to ask Reagan if Burke had gone into her room at all, which is just so creepy. Like, why was he in her room? Maybe, again, we didn't get to see it. So maybe she called him to his room or something like that.
Yeah, or, the bed was shaking again. And so he went up there to investigate. If you're watching a kid and you hear like incredible pounding from upstairs, you're going to go check it out.
True. The scene officially ends with him asking for an autograph, which... just so inappropriate. What a weirdo.
That is 2 interactions we've seen with this cop, and both times has established that he is so unprofessional. Like, just incredibly unprofessional to ask first. And he asks for an autograph for his daughter. And then Chris says, "Oh, sure. What's your daughter's name?" And there's this awkward pause. And he's like, "Okay, it's for me." Ugh. And that's just weird, man. Just leave it at home. This is work. You're investigating a murder. So calm down.
He leaves, and immediately Chris is scared. You can see that really she knows, or at least thinks, it's possible that her daughter killed Burke.
Yeah, I mean, her behavior has been escalating throughout the course of this movie. And, again, looking at it from a realistic point of view, I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to think that happened.
Reagan screams, and her mom runs up to find her room full of just stuff flying around everywhere. Reagan is bloody from stabbing herself in the genitals with the cross.
Yeah, so I don't think it's stabbing so much as I think she's masturbating with it. She's penetrating herself with the crucifix.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I believe she also looks at Chris and screams, "Lick me," over and over again.
Yes.
And again, it just made me so uncomfortable. I even now, like, being so desensitized to foul language, to sexuality, to violence, it still just like made me very uncomfortable.
Well, it's a child, so.
Yeah, well, I'm making that point to demonstrate that the movie is still effective 50 years later. Briana.
Okay. Well, also the devil's voice is British sometimes, and sometimes just sounds a little proper. I thought that was kind of funny. I found funny moments where I could hear. Oh, also, this is where Reagan's neck turns fully around.
Yes. And then the devil also, he says something to Chris about Reagan, and he refers to her as your cunting daughter.
Oh, my God.
Which I just like, was that word more acceptable in the 70s? Again, if you have been to a piano party, when you DM us, please let me know if like you all just walked around referring to somebody as cunting in the 70s, because I honestly don't know. And then my last note on this scene was sort of like a culmination of the entire film. I noticed Chris takes the Lord's name in vain a lot. Through the course of the movie. She says Jesus Christ so many times, and like nothing's ever really mentioned about it or like implied about it, but I feel like it's relevant. I just feel like if my daughter is possessed by a demon, I'm probably not taking the Lord's name in vain every 30 seconds.
So next she meets with Father Karras. I think this was a scheduled meeting. Like they were planning to meet. It wasn't just happenstance.
Yes. So she reached out to Father Karras after the incident with the doctors when they suggest the placebo exorcism. I think because he's a priest, but also because he's a psychiatrist. So she's kind of killing two birds with one stone here.
Yeah. So they have a bit of a casual conversation, and then she just kind of dives in, asking about getting an exorcism. And he says it just doesn't happen anymore because of the advances in psychology. And plus, you need proof for the church to approve it. But she begs him for help. Now, I had no idea you needed church, like official Catholic Church approval to do an exorcism.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Exorcisms or possessions are sort of like miracles where they need all kinds of like authorization to happen. Otherwise, they don't count. So you need like somebody from the Vatican to come and look and be like, oh, yeah, totally. That kid has a demon in her.
Cool. That's easy. So they go to the house. In her bedroom, there's a lot of crashing, wailing. she's now strapped to the bed and very demonic looking. She's got the demon eyes. Her skin is just broken and just
like greenish
and bloodied. And she's got those crazy chapped lips. The homeless man altar boy comment comes back from the beginning where he was in that Father Karras was in the train station and he kind of meets that homeless man. That voice, exactly as we heard it before, comes out. Same quote and everything.
Yeah, Father Karras is looking like out the window. He's got his back to Reagan, and you hear somebody say or repeat in the voice of the homeless man the lines he said to him.
We get that classic projectile vomit scene.
Yeah. Classic. Everybody knows that scene. Everybody loves that scene.
Loves?
I will never eat split pea soup.
I mean, I wasn't going to before either. It sounds disgusting. The demon is saying that his mother, so Father Karras' mother, is in there too. Father Karras doesn't believe this is a true possession at this point, and so he kind of tests her, asking for his mother's maiden name. Next, Father Karras and Mom are in the basement to clean his clothes from the vomit, and he's kind of just looking at the drawings and the art that she's done, and he says the church needs proof of possession, like speaking a language that she wouldn't otherwise know. And I'm just wondering how the voice changes don't count at this point. Like, this girl has changed voices, including an experience that only he would know, the homeless man. How is that not counting for him?
Yeah, I think it's just, again, coming at it from kind of a realistic approach. I think all these people are just trying to, that saying, when you eliminate the improbable, all that's left is the impossible. And I think that's kind of the approach they're taking here, where it's like, yeah, it's crazy that I heard that voice, and it's crazy that she changes her voice more than you'd think somebody could just normally do. But I need to make sure that this isn't just like a really talented voice actor first.
So as he's leaving the house, he asks Chris if Reagan knew a priest was coming or that his mother died. And Mom says no, and he just leaves saying, okay, it's not important. Although, I mean, it is. How did she know this? The next scene is confusing to me. I don't understand what's happening, but the priest is listening to calls or tapes that were from sometime before this all started, the possession. It's just of Reagan talking to her dad. But what is it? Is it tapes? Like, why were these taped?
I'm not 100% sure either, to be honest with you. I just assume they were supplied by Chris. Maybe Chris is giving it to the priest to kind of say, hey, listen to this. Like, that way this isn't her. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, back to Reagan. She just looks worse. Karras decides to meet with her again for further assessment. And he continues to talk to her like he's talking to a child. Even when the nightstand drawer opens without anyone touching it, he just is like, are you doing that? And he just, like you would talk to a child. So he's still believing psychology over religion at this point. The devil speaks in Latin. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then Karras pulls out holy water. And the devil acts scared. So Reagan, or the devil, is acting scared. And then he kind of like spurts it on her and it's just screaming, it burns, it burns. He leaves the room and the mom is in the middle of a phone conversation. So he kind of overhears that and waits for it to be over. And then he goes into her little office space. She offers him a drink and he kind of just asks, where the dad is and that she should tell him about all of this.
Yeah, she hasn't told him yet, which is just crazy to me.
He's not involved. I think it's been established that he's, a bad dad.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's a bad dad, but she is possessed by a demon. I think even bad dads should get a heads up about that.
I just wonder how long has it been? Like, he didn't call her on her birthday and she can't even get in touch with him.
Yeah. So yeah. No, you're right.
She's probably just like, ugh.
Yeah. And one takeaway I had from this scene, I remember thinking as Chris is on the phone, I don't even remember the conversation that Father Karras walks into, but Chris just is genuinely a great mom. Like, she is so genuine. She just cares about her daughter. And I just feel like that's such a departure from so many movies, especially horror movies, that are just filled with shitty parents. I mean, Hocus Pocus, those kids are like, they're witches, they're trying to eat us. And the dad's just like, shut up, kid, I'm having a good time. But this mother is just putting it all out there for her daughter, and I really love that.
Hocus Pocus, the true example of a horror film. So he also adds that she reacted to the holy water, but the holy water has to be blessed, and this was just water, so it was fake holy water.
Yeah, and, to him, this is like a sign that she's not really possessed. But us, knowing that she is possessed or believing that she is possessed, I kind of took it as the demon was doing that on purpose to sow more discord. Like the demon wasn't actually burning, but it was yelling, it burns, to make Father Karras think this isn't real and get a little more power in the situation.
And this leads Mom to confess that Reagan killed Burke. So and confess in the way that she just knows, in her heart of hearts, probably, that this is how it happened. So next, Father Karras is listening to more tapes, but this time it is the devil. But then someone else comes in and is like, oh yeah, that's English. It's just in reverse. So he reverses the tape and hears English. A phone call interrupts that, and it's Sharon. So the nanny or whatever she is. She calls, and he goes straight back to the house where Sharon brings him into Reagan's bedroom. She unbuttons her pajamas, and the camera looks at her stomach where there's some scarring that then turns into "help me." That was creepy.
Yeah, it was creepy, but also, how did she find that?
I know.
Like that was, this girl is strapped to a bed. What are you doing unbuttoning her shirt?
Well, don't get sinister with it.
I'm just asking the questions, Brianna.
Also, she's sleeping, and I just think it's funny that the devil sleeps.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got to sleep. I love sleep.
Well,
sloth is a deadly sin.
I think this is finally enough proof for him. So he goes to get the exorcism approved by, some higher up person. They say that Father Karras needs someone else, like a sidekick, someone who's more experienced, and they call on Father Marin from the very beginning. Father Marin reports to the house immediately from Woodstock. That's where he was after coming back from Iraq. And he immediately gets down to business. He just starts listing off supplies for Father Karras to get. But Father Karras is saying, wait, let me give you the background story. And Marin's like, don't need it. Don't bother.
I love this. That's what I thought during the scene is like, Father Marin is all business. He is just here to exorcise demons and chew bubblegum, and he is all out of bubblegum.
Yeah, well, he's done this before. And this is just to show us, how each man is approaching this at this point. So Father Karras, even though he knows this is a possession, theoretically, he's still looking at this from a man who's in a faith crisis of his own and has a scientific background. So he's coming with it from that perspective, while Father Marin is coming from faith. The background is simple. This was a normal girl, and now she's possessed. As they prep, Marin tells Karras to not get involved in conversation with it. It will lie, but worse, it will mix in truth, so don't bother listening. Again, Karras insists that Marin needs to hear the background. So he starts saying, there's 3 personalities, but Marin interrupts saying, no, there is only one. They go into the room, and it is absolutely frigid. You can just see all of their breath. They are visibly cold. And this is where you told me an interesting fact.
Yeah, so the room actually was kept cold. It was actually freezing in there, and poor Linda Blair was just like miserable on set during these shoots because it was like 20 degrees in this room, and she's just at times laying there in a little evening gown. Probably was miserable.
She probably lives in Hawaii now and like never goes anywhere cold ever.
She actually did specifically say she hates the cold because of it. So you might be right.
Well, the devil starts rattling off, its typical profanities, and Marin just shouts, "Silence." And I'm like, okay, Gandalf, you're a badass, all right.
Yeah.
The devil spits
Exercise me, priest daddy.
The devil spits in his face. Absolutely disgusting, but he just keeps going. He is our king. Karras is mostly just watching while Marin takes lead, and the bed lifts and rattles on its own accord. And this is where Karras's face changes, and really you can see that he is starting to believe that like the shit's real.
Yeah, I think at this point Karras is like all in. He's like, all right, like this is definitely a demon, which I don't know anything about, but Marin's going to handle this, and we got this.
The lights flash, and we see that same devil face that we've seen now. Reagan's tongue is going crazy. Her eyes are just getting worse. The vomit is just running out of her, so everything is just escalating right now. Then the devil starts laughing, and Father Marin just seems really tired, and he coughs, and it kind of feels like the devil is winning at this point. The ceiling starts cracking, the doors are cracking. Her head, once again, twists around completely. The entire room is rattling. The devil tells Karras that he killed his mother. Reagan's eyes go white, and the straps that are holding her down start to break. She levitates, and that's where together they repeat over and over, "The power of Christ compels you."
Does it? Does it, Brianna? I'm not feeling very compelled.
until her body goes back onto the bed. Karis leans over and straps her wrists together, which is wrong, okay? She wasn't strapped with her wrists together. She was strapped to the bed. And so immediately as he's doing this, I'm like, you're doing it wrong. She's going to hit you over the head, which of course she does. Pretty hard because he really struggles to get up. Oh, and we get like a flash of the statue from the beginning too.
Yes, yeah, it's in like fog. It's very dark. Yeah.
They take a break. And it's funny to me that the devil just like respects the timeout. They're like, all right, yeah, we're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, trials have recess. Same thing with exorcisms.
Outside of the bedroom, Marin takes another pill. He's shaking again, so he takes that pill. Then they kind of talk, and Karis asks, why her? And Marin says, I think the point is to make us despair. Again, Karis wants logic from this, and Marin reminds him and viewers that there is no logic here, which is probably the scariest part of this whole thing is you can't apply logic to this. This can just happen.
Yeah, and I that's a very scary concept. I know, to bring up another movie briefly, we've talked about The Strangers, and that's a movie that you refuse to watch.
No.
Yeah, and at the end of that movie, they say, why are you doing this to us? And they go, because you were home. It just kind of drives home that same point. It makes everything that came before it seem even worse because, we want to think there's some sense of justice. We want to think that, bad people get bad things, good people get good things. But just like this just happened because this demon wanted to be an asshole and decided to wreak all this havoc on an innocent girl and her family. And that's scary.
Next, Karis goes into the room alone, and he sees his mother on the bed. So he's not seeing Reagan, it's his mother. And
which made you gasp, by the way. It scared Brianna. As soon as he opens the door, she goes,
ghostly looking. It was ghostly looking.
It's ghost.
And she's speaking as the mother, but then eventually what we see goes back to Reagan, but she's still speaking as his mother. He checks her vitals, and her heart is just not doing well. Marin tells him to get out. And I forget why. Is it because he's getting too emotional?
Yeah, the demon is doing a great job of playing at Karis's guilt because the demon is saying you killed your mother, but the demon is only saying that because Karis believes it. I don't actually think Karis's mother is quote unquote in there.
No.
It's just the demon can tell what Karis is thinking and feeling, and he knows that this is a spot that he can exploit, and he does it very well. So Marin's basically like, dude, if you can't keep it together, you got to get out of here because I got a demon to exorcise. Again, this guy is just so badass.
Right. I noticed also Reagan's skin looks better all of a sudden. It's like less puffy, less bumpy, almost like they're fresh cuts instead of like the old cuts.
Yeah, and I think that's meant to show like progress through the exorcism,
okay,
showing that
that's
the
what
things,
I was wondering.
Yeah, the things that they've been doing to this point are working, so we need to continue to do them.
Okay. I thought, is it working or is it a continuation error?
It might be. That's just what I always thought.
Yeah. Marin takes hold of her hand and kneels to pray. Meanwhile, Mom checks in with Karis, asking if it's over and if she's going to die, and he just says no, and he goes back in. The door rings, and it's that freaking detective with like the worst timing ever. But we follow Karis back into the bedroom, and he finds Marin on the floor. He's dead. The devil is sitting up and laughs, and Karis just friggin' loses it. He attacks her, a child, and is just beating her.
Yeah, and I just need to know, like, did they use a stunt double? Was he for real throwing punches at this 14-year-old girl? Like, what happened there? Because it's just so cool.
And so we're kind of at the culmination of all this right now, and he's saying, take me, take me. And the devil actually does it. It says, all right, I'll piece out of this one and go into you. As the devil takes host in Karis, he throws himself out the window and consequently down the stairwell. Reagan is now fully herself, crying on the floor for her mom. The cop is just like, what the fuck have I walked into? And a crowd gathers at Father Karis's body, and Father Dwyer goes to the ground to comfort him in his last moments.
And give him his last rites, which right. Father Dwyer is very upset about this. He's like, you need to let go of your sins before you die or you won't get into heaven. He's like super concerned for his friend here.
And that's it. Next, they're packing the house. Sharon and Chris, say their goodbyes. Sharon gives a necklace that says she got it from the priest. It's the necklace that we've seen, that coin. And Mom takes it. Outside, she says her goodbyes to Father Dwyer. Reagan gets introduced to him since she remembers nothing from this entire time. And when she notices he's a priest, she kisses him on the cheek. So I guess maybe, and just thinking about Blatty, the author, I feel like this is like newfound faith because they previously were basically atheists. And now I feel like, does Regan have faith now?
Yeah. And I also think some part of her, even though she doesn't remember, she still feels it. You know, she sees this priest and she feels this overwhelming feeling of gratitude and compassion, and just is really grateful and doesn't really understand why. That's how I always kind of took that scene. She just knows that this priest is a friend and just gives him a kiss.
Mom gives him the necklace, but he gives it back, insisting that they keep it. They drive away, and Dwyer walks away. He passes the window, you know, Regan's window, and then looks down at the steps. Then he walks back and sees the detective, and they chat casually about Regan and how, you know, she's all good now. She doesn't remember anything. And they just have this weird conversation mirroring the one that he had with Karis, and the detective invites Dwyer to lunch.
Yeah, and they go. And that's how the movie ends.
And we get kind of that music again out.
Yeah, with the detective making a new friend. I mean, really, isn't that what this movie is all about? The friends we made along the way?
Yeah, exactly. Our overall kind of final thoughts on the movie. Do you want to share yours?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't really have any sort of like overarching theory or think there was like anything central that I want to talk about with this movie. I love this movie. It's always going to be one of my favorites. And spoiler alert, I know you feel a little differently, and that's okay. But it was great to watch this movie again. It had been a few years.
I'll say I feel differently than how I initially felt. How I initially felt was I did not like this movie. I didn't find it scary, and I didn't like it.
Yeah, right after the movie was over, I asked her, you know, how do you feel about it? And we try not to talk too much about the movies before the podcast because we want to have actual conversation while we're recording this. But you could just tell, like I asked her because you could tell it was all over her face. She was not impressed at all. And I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed. I was like, man, I might have to find a new podcast partner and or girlfriend.
Well, one of the reasons why I initially felt that way was just I felt that there were too many cuts and just too many insignificant moments. So I found many parts like outside of the meat of this to be confusing. And we talked about this a little bit, that it's kind of an overall trend in horror where you might see things happening and not really know why or what's going on. And then maybe it will come together later and you can put the pieces together.
Yeah. And I think the fast cuts, too, is another thing. It's like a tool that's used to kind of keep you on your toes, to keep you from getting too settled and too comfortable in a scene. Because at the end of the day, the goal of a scary movie is to make you uncomfortable.
Another thought I had was that I did not think whatsoever that this film was going to be wrapped up in a tiny bow like it actually was. I assumed Regan would die, and when she didn't, and instead the devil so willingly moved on to someone else, I thought at the end that we would see the devil had moved on again, probably to Father Dwyer, who had grasped Father Karras's hand. And I just thought, you know, in these last moments, he's going to flip over into Dwyer, and maybe in one of those last scenes, we'll see his eyes flash or something like that. I just kept waiting and waiting, but there was more or less a happy ending.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely a product of the times. I think if that movie is made 30 years later, that is absolutely how it ends, because you need to set up the franchise and the sequel. But at the time, we were still making movies to just tell stories and not make as much money as possible. So yeah, it worked out to wrap it up that way.
My last and longest point is, to me, this is not a horror movie. And in my research, because I did research, guys, that's what led me to actually appreciate this movie, because it is more than just a horror movie. It's actually like a story about faith. So much, and we're not going to do a review because I basically am doing a review kind of. But so much of this movie made me want to learn more about the author of the book and obviously the screenplay, because he did the same thing, William Peter Blatty, particularly his position on medicine and psychology and religion, because all three of these things are very central to the plot. And so I couldn't help but regress to high school on this, where, you know, shout out to Pinkerton Academy and all those fellow alum, because I just approached this like a 25-page thesis paper. I read 4 articles. It's not 25 pages, so don't worry about that. But I had to like write something.
Wait,
here.
So those pages right there, you wrote those?
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Okay, so the 4 articles that I read are Remembering William Peter Blatty, author of The Exorcist. This is from NPR. It was heard on All Things Considered. The second one was William Peter Blatty, author of The Exorcist, dies at 89, from the New York Times by Paul Vitello. He died in 2017. The third is think The Exorcist was just a horror movie. The author says you're wrong, from the Washingtonian, that is so hard to say, by Eddie Dean. And then somewhere between science and superstition, religious outrage, horrific science, and The Exorcist, which is a research article from Sage Journals by Amy C. Chambers, which was by far the longest one. And I only took pieces of it. So my goal with this was to figure out Blatty's opinions on science versus religion. Initially, I thought Blatty was fully against the medical field due to the harshness of the medical scenes, but also science, particularly psychology, was not fully disregarded. And I just overall found that confusing. I definitely believed that he was a religious man since, in the end, faith prevails. And it turns out that the harshness was intentional and done to get a particular message across. So first, from these various articles, I gathered that pieces of The Exorcist are actually representative of Blatty's life. And in fact, he used his life experiences in a lot of his works since The Exorcist. Overall, the books and film were definitely religiously motivated. In fact, the story of a possession of a child is inspired by true events that he learned in theology class while studying at Georgetown University. His time at Georgetown was very important. He said, those years at Georgetown were probably the best years of my life. Until then, I'd never had a home. To give a little background on his childhood, he describes it as comfortably destitute. His mother was a Lebanese immigrant. She raised him Catholic, and she herself never learned to read English, but survived mostly on peddling homemade jelly. Of his mother, he says, my mom kept us going. It was the power of her faith and conviction that God would eventually make everything right. It just flowed out of her onto everything that she touched. So it's no surprise that when she passed, just as he began formulating the book, that he was inspired to create Father Karras. Like Father Karras, the death of his mother left him wrestling with his own faith. And he says, there was a period of time after my mother's death when I would describe my faith as more of an intense hope than a solidly held belief. Back to Georgetown, he recalls thinking that if somebody would dig into this and authenticate it and show that it's the real thing, what a gift to the faith. It stayed in my mind, and I thought maybe someday I'd write a nonfiction account. And that's referring to the exorcism story that he learned. After graduating and getting married and going in and out of a ton of different jobs, he found himself unemployed and recalling that story he had learned in 1949. Again, he wanted to go the nonfiction route, and he actually contacted the priest who performed the exorcism, even offering to ghostwrite it, but they did not want to publicize the event because the family had requested anonymity. With that in mind, he said, let's go fiction, and he switched it from a 14-year-old boy to a 12-ish-year-old girl. Blatty describes the work as an argument for God. I intended it to be an apostolic work to help people in their faith, because I thoroughly believed in the authenticity and validity of that particular event. Unfortunately for Blatty, although not really since this made him quite successful, his mission did not quite succeed. The religious aspect of this wasn't really the central focus for most viewers, much of which is due to the era in which it was released. With it being during the Vietnam era, the Washingtonian article, literally the hardest thing to say, it became a metaphor for a country whose youth were out of control. However, Blatty says there is no hidden message. The book is the book, and it says what I wanted it to say. This all explains the religious aspect of the film, very clearly coming straight from the author. So what about the digs to science, and are they actually even digs? The research article from the Sage Journal really discusses this extensively. And according to it, this film became a long-term cultural touchstone for discussions of the tension between science and religion, the representation and treatment of mental health, and the position of religion in contemporary North America. Very simple topics to discuss, I think. Yeah?
Yeah, no, my eyes definitely didn't just glaze over.
Well, one of the true horrors of this film is that the science we see is not far-fetched or abstract. It's not talking about some future that may or may not ever exist. And that's thanks to the extensive research from the director, William Friedkin. There's so much to say about this, but just, summarizing it. To Blatty's credit, he obviously isn't against science in any way. We see it with Father Karras, who is at times more science-leaning than faith-based. And Father Marin, he's an archaeologist. I think he may have created those characters in part because the Catholic Church was intentionally attempting to modernize during this time, including embracing science more than it had in the past. Of note, the Catholic Church did not appreciate this film at all, truly shocking. Their official review from Catholic Film Newsletter, which I'm sure is riveting to read.
Oh, I've had a subscription for like 12 years now.
is negative and points out the rarity of exorcisms because of, quote, modern knowledge of psychosomatic disorders is why the church in recent time has rarely approved the use of the rite of exorcism.
And I found that really hilarious because, like, they can't just come out and say, like, there's no such thing as demonic possession because, like, their whole religion hinges on it.
Right,
So,
right.
But in this review, they're seemingly saying this is nonsense.
And fascinating, you would actually love, I think, the Sage Journal article because, or research paper, basically. It goes into how the Catholic faith and Christianity in general was fully wrapped into Hollywood and how they had like rating systems and they got to approve certain things. And this time period, that was kind of shifting. So that all plays into this as well.
We talked about that a little bit with the Hays Code. I'm sure the
Yes.
article mentioned that. We talked about that with Psycho.
Exactly. So Friedkin wanted to, quote, root the picture in time, recent time, in order for viewers to see that this is real and rational in terms of what is happening medically to Reagan. In an internal Warner Brothers memo, Friedkin said he and Blatty both wanted to include the most up-to-date sciences. With that in mind, medicine is shown to be inconclusive, though evolving, as though to suggest that with more and more studying and trial and error, a conclusion may arise. And that's what science is. It's having an idea and running with it and then pivoting when it pans out wrong.
So it's basically saying that with enough scientific advancement, we could use science to prove the existence of God and demons?
No.
Oh, that's what I think that's what you just said.
It's saying that eventually we would be able to prove that this is not an exorcism thing. It's science, and we could figure out what's wrong.
Interesting. Okay.
But what really caused the drama for viewers, at least according to what I've read, during the film's release, you know, the vomiting, the fainting, the heart attacks, all that, were the medical scenes. That's what was really traumatizing for people to see. Reagan is seen as an experiment. She's controlled, probed, poked, and prodded, all to no avail. And the procedures grow increasingly and more seemingly barbaric. She undergoes a cerebral angiography, which we talked about. That's the splurting, I can't say spurting blood scene. And a PEG, which you got to Google what that stands for. I was going to write it out, but then I was like, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. And they don't do it anymore because that happened to be phased out after the film was released. And that's the aspect of the film that is real and therefore spoke the most to viewers. There's no release to these scenes. They begin very typical with a nurse, you know, taking her temperature, but they grow less and less warm to where she is alone, strapped to loud and harsh machinery, and it's all for nothing. Eventually, it leads them to suggest exorcism, but only in a psychological manner rooted in delusion. Last paragraph. All this leads to the creation of a horror subgenre focused on medical procedures and the horrors that could be enacted on humans. Friedkin researched so much with the hope of getting across that while science failed Reagan, it may not be the case in the future, and the idea that religion and science are open to being wrong and open to the other, as opposed to immediately resorting to the worst-case scenarios. In the end, perhaps the most important thing to remember is the underlying point of the story, according to Blatty. He told a New Orleans paper in 2000 that it was essential to him that people understand the point of The Exorcist, which is that God exists and the universe itself will have a happy ending.
Well, that's just downright uplifting.
Exactly.
All right. I love it.
So I ended up kind of liking the film because it's clearly about a lot more than what we see at face value. All right. So with all that being said, what was your jump score?
Yeah, I'm glad it grew on you. So my jump score, I only gave it a 4 out of 10. There weren't a lot of jump scares. I mean, I know the demon face scared you, and the demon face was effective, but I would argue those are really the only things that were even remotely jump scary in the movie.
Yeah,
Would you agree with that?
I gave it a 1. So
yeah.
Nightlight.
Nightlight score. I've revised this. I wrote my Nightlight score immediately after we reviewed the movie, but having a few days to think about it, I'm going to bump it up to a 6 out of 10.
What?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here that's just really unsettling. Like, you know, I lay in bed at night and I can't help but see the crucifix scene, you know, and it doesn't scare me or bother me, but it just sticks with you. So I gave it a 6. What'd you give it?
A 1. I think I really watched this film completely differently than you did.
Yeah, I think you're definitely on the analytical sciencey side of it, and I'm just listening to my feelings like a loser. But hey, if that's what it took to get you to come around and not hate it, I'm all for it. So then my horror buff score, I gave it a 9. 9 out of 10, which is, I know that's high praise, but like I said earlier, this is one of my favorite movies. A lot of the shots are still really unsettling and still work even after all this time. Some of the effects have aged, but all in all, it holds up. And Father Karras and Chris are both just really great, well-written, well-developed characters. Even outside of a horror, just from a movie junkie standpoint, I really appreciated that. The only reason I didn't give it a 10 out of 10 is because it just doesn't really scare me anymore. And I would need to be scared, but it's really hard for me to look at anything in this movie and say, I don't like this.
You have a deep appreciation for it.
Absolutely.
My Scaredy Cat score is, I have a 0 written down, but it's anywhere between like a 0 and a 2. I think it can change from like moment to moment when I think about it. I'm not scared of it, but there are parts of it that are unsettling, and it really blows my mind that people reacted physically to this film the way that they did, or that they stormed out. But again, you have to remember the time and things like that. But Scaredy Cat score doesn't reflect the film. So,
all right. Well, this is our last episode, and I can't see you anymore.
Wow. Great. Okay, so next week we're going to be watching Trick or Treat, and I am deeply afraid. This was my idea. I mean, the whole thing was my idea, but this movie in particular, for Halloween, I love a theme. I'm regretting this already.
I love Trick or Treat. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor, watch it before we talk about it next week. If you have seen it, watch it again, get refreshed. This is I honestly don't know how much you're going to love Trick or Treat. I feel like Trick or Treat is a horror person's horror movie. It is, it's one of those films that's made, sort of like Scream, how Scream is appreciated in a different way by people who like scary movies versus people who don't. It's just, I can't say enough good things about this movie, and it's been a while since I've watched it, so I'm actually really excited to watch it again.
I'm so afraid. So I'm kind of hoping to be afraid. I haven't really fully been afraid yet. I mean, I was afraid of The Grudge. I'm still afraid of The Grudge. But I haven't been terrified yet.
Yeah. So we have our movies planned out through the end of the year. That being said, if we get a couple more movies in and she's not really scared yet, I'm going to make her watch something really scary. I was thinking maybe Hereditary.
Oh, God.
The only reason I haven't made her watch Hereditary yet is because I know I won't be able to leave her side for a week. But
more than that.
Yeah. I think Trick or Treat's really gonna scare you a bit. And listeners, if it doesn't, don't worry. You will hear Briana scream and cry before this podcast ends.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging with us. I think this episode is our longest so far.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Time. Thanks for sticking it out.
Don't say sorry. We made some great points. I wrote an essay for this. Okay. Appreciate it. Besides the fact that I just demanded you appreciate it, please also leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and wherever else that you listen to podcasts.
Look, honestly, I'll take 4 stars. I'll take 4 stars.
4 to 5.
Just give us a positive review. Tell your friends about it. I would love to just get famous from this and never have to work again. So if you could help me make that happen, I would really appreciate it.
In other words, we appreciate the support, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot.